I'm very pleased to have with me today Rick Small and Markus Schulz. Rick leads the financial crimes team at Truist, one of the largest banks in the US by asset size, and brings to the table over 35 years of experience across both the public and private sector. Rick is a former federal prosecutor, and in fact, he created the AML program at the Federal Reserve and has led AML teams at some of the largest financial institutions in the world. Markus is the global head of change management for financial crime compliance at ING, one of the largest banks in the world. Markus brings over 25 years of experience across the financial services sector and is a very active member of the compliance community due to the work that he does with the Wolfsburg Group as well as the Egmont Group. Having both Rick and Markus with us today is an absolute honor. But more importantly, I believe it will help us give a unique and real-time insight and perspective into what this pandemic means for our community. It will allow us to put a finger on the pulse of what our collective concerns are, perhaps where our vulnerabilities lie, but more importantly, what we should be doing as a community, what should our priorities be. So thank you, Rick and Markus, for joining us today. I'll start off with a broad overarching question for both of you. Obviously, this global pandemic started off as a health crisis, and I'm very hopeful that in a relatively short period of time, we should have a solution to this. But it has slowly, very quickly, actually, transformed itself into the biggest financial crisis of our lifetimes, I would say. There's vast amounts of money that is being pumped into the financial system, which, as you all know, creates potential for fraud, financial crime, and other illicit acts. I'm a member of the financial crime compliance community. I'm watching this unfold real time in front of me. What should I be doing, thinking about? And perhaps maybe we can start off with you, Rick, getting your perspective on this.
Sure. Thanks, Rohit. And thrilled to be with both of you today. So thank you so much. One of the things from our financial crimes perspective is we're seeing a lot less transactions. So for those of us that are responsible, for example, for reporting cash transactions in my institution, that's down big percentages. So our cash transaction reporting is down, and that makes sense because as we saw happen, sort of middle of March, at least in the U.S., and then moving forward, businesses shut down. Businesses are already all now shut down, and for the most part are just starting to come back online. Some businesses obviously have tried to continue to operate, but those businesses, a lot of them aren't taking cash. Personal perspective, second, third week in March, we went out to pick up a drive-up curbside delivery from a restaurant. They wouldn't accept cash, so we had to pay in advance and use our debit card or credit card or some form of electronic payment. So cash is gone. So now think about what that means when we talk about money laundering for drug trafficking, where the mainstay used to be paying cash for drugs on the street, and then the drug traffickers trying to get that back into the system. We're not seeing that cash coming back the same way. Similarly, if you think more holistically about how we look for suspicious activity for institutions, pretty much all of us have automated transaction monitoring today. We're seeing a significant decline in the amount of transactions overall. The other big issue, and I know we talk about it and you mentioned it, the flood of money coming into the system from governments for aid. But if you sort of think about that a little bit, one of the tenets of our money laundering controls or anti-money laundering controls is we want to understand the source of the funds, because if the source is bad, we want to be able to address it. Here we know the source of the funds. The source of the funds are the governments. So if the governments are pumping money in, we shouldn't be concerned about that in the first instance. So this is where we begin to pivot a little bit about, do we need to start thinking about how we have controls that will manage the secondary transfers of those funds? Are legitimate people versus illegitimate people getting those funds from the government? And if we take the illegitimate, are they then trying to move it through our banks to then profit from the illegitimacy of getting that money from the government. We need to start thinking about what the new normal is. Do we need to really start thinking about how terrorists are going to try and move funds when they don't have the ability to have cash anymore in the way they did before? So it's now time, in my mind, and in my opinion, it's now time to really start thinking about what does the future look like in implementing appropriate financial crimes related controls if this is our new normal. Less transactions, not as much cash, and the business flow is a lot different. So sort of my short but longer answer around where I see us sitting today.
Right, thank you. Maybe let's hear Marcus's perspective.
It is actually similar and different. Obviously, at my institution, we have the benefit of looking across a very broad number of countries in Europe and outside in Europe. And we have a very large footprint with 42 million customers, which gives you a really good sense of the various markets. And to a large extent, I can reflect what Rick said. But then there's also abnormal behaviors. For example, we have seen in one country an insane amount of cash withdrawals that we have never seen before. We've had more cash withdrawals in a week than we normally would have in a quarter by the retail customers, especially in the beginning of the pandemic, when people were a little bit panicking, not knowing what's coming. So let's take some cash home. So we have seen extraordinary cash amounts for people who have never used cash other than maybe your normal pocket change that you need to do your life. And all of a sudden they've taken hundreds and hundreds of euros and other currencies out, take them home to save them at home, or just being, I guess, some having liquidity in case of who knows what's coming. Now, Europe having been hit a little bit earlier by the pandemic, what we see now, we see abnormal in cash inflows because people bring back their cash because they didn't need it before. And because the system was continuing, they could do business, they could shop normally, supermarkets would accept their credit cards. So it wasn't what they thought it is. All of a sudden, we have this second wave of cash coming in that we normally wouldn't see. All of these behaviors, of course, you need to think about and think this through, because that what looks unusual is not unusual. So we see, similar as what Rick said, different transaction patterns from the privates, but also from the corporates. Interesting enough, though, we do actually see not a drop overall in transactions. We actually see an increase in transactions, but the value has dropped. So the average value has dropped, but then volume has increased. So again, all of these dynamics. And Rick said that already nicely. He talked with his team about the new normal. What will be the new normal? Actually, none of us really knows, but it's worthwhile looking into these possibilities. I think it's all more about scenario planning right now to see if it goes that way, what does it mean for me? If it goes this way, what does it mean for me? But yeah, being prepared. I think this event, many people will touch on these kind of changes and typologies. So I think it's a perfect timing for people to get input. Will we find the answers in the 24 hours? Possibly not. But I'm sure we will get a lot of inputs, different perspectives and thinking, which will help us in return when we go back to our desks, to our teams, to think differently about what's to come.
As I have talked to members of our community around the world, sometimes I get two very different perspectives. There's a group, a section of the community that feels that things have changed drastically, and then there's a section of the community that feels that fundamentally some things are still the same. And I'm sure there's a spectrum on this where certain things may have changed, but certain things have remained the same. Perhaps, Marcus, if you don't mind commenting and unpacking that a bit, as you look at what are some of the things that have remained fundamental that doesn't change, pre-COVID and even right now.
I think one of the things that has not changed, and we should remind ourselves that we need to understand the risks. So the fundamentals of our business, of our job, of our profession is to understand the financial crime risks involved. And I've seen too many people running around saying everything is different now and the world has changed. But actually has it so much when you look at the underlying risks and the way we conduct our work. So look at the portfolio. So you do some advisory business. So the business will come with deals. The deals will have maybe different nature now. They may be partially government guaranteed, partially maybe not. There's different players involved, but you still think that there's principles apply. You have to understand structures, risk, where's the risk for the bank, where's the exposure, and all of these things. If you think about your change program that you maybe run, or an enhancement program that you're currently busy with, well, your objective is not going to change. You still want to enhance your program. You still want to progress it. How you get there, however, that will change, because maybe you grow a team right now. You need to hire them virtually. Now, interviewing virtually is one thing. That's actually relatively easy. We have done this many times before, that we don't have to fly candidates around. But onboarding a person, getting the person up to speed virtually, is a whole different ballgame. So yes, does your change program need to be modified? Not necessarily with your goals, but how? So you need to reconfigure it. If you then look at other aspects that you need to think broad about your business and about your organization, I think that's where we need to spend more time as compliance professionals than ever before, understanding what is changing in the bank. So forget about financial crime for a second. It's how is the bank now changing? In response to the crisis. We've seen that in our bank. I'm sure, Rick, you've seen the same in yours. We've pulled people out of some jobs and put them onto other jobs because we needed call center people to answer questions at the beginning for what does it mean, governance support, mortgage holidays. We were overwhelmed as an organization. So people have changed jobs. That brings new risks as well, because they've taken a job in the interest of the client. But of course, we need to make sure that they're maybe not having had all the mandatory trainings for these areas, that they get parachuted in just to help, which is the right thing to do as the organization. But how can we help that? We have had do some session quickly to train people on certain things, because they were involved in advisory business and they have never had the training. They were good on the product side, but never had the mandatory training, what questions to ask, how to ask, what to write down, how to complete the KYC forms. Again, there's differences in the organization, nothing to do with financial crime in first place, that we have to understand and also look forward, in response to the crisis, but then also how's the bank more longer term adapting and changing their procedures, setups, maybe even product sets. Maybe new products come up, maybe some products disappear. Are we close enough to the product development? Are we involved enough? That's a general question that always applies, really, but maybe now more than ever, given the speed and the pace of change in the business side. So I think we need to realize that we're not living on an island, and we need to remind ourselves, and especially now it's a little harder because we don't see colleagues, you don't bump into the head of payments and the head of this product and maybe an underwriter, you don't do this anymore. So are you making enough efforts while you're sitting at home in isolation to understand what's going on around you, not only with your teams, but within the broader bank?
And I would just add, I'm sorry, Rohit, I would just add to that because I think it's a great point. So if you think about the AML side, absolutely what Markus is talking about, but Markus's point about things not changing. So if you think about the fraud side, so managing fraud has got to be agile every day, because you have a fraud event that happens and you have to immediately adjust your systems. Maybe you won't clear as many transactions without a review. Maybe you'll raise or lower some limits. So all that's happened here is it's just another event on the fraud side. The fraud team still operates exactly the way they've been operating consistently, which is we see a fraud event or we get wind of a fraud event that's happening at another bank, and we adjust our controls internally. So it really, nothing is different in that aspect. It really is just about pivoting to the next event.
Got it. No, thank you. That's quite insightful. And both of you referenced, Markus, you referenced to new product development as an example, and then Rick, you were mentioning about the new normal. Let's kind of hypothetically fast forward a year from now. Let's say a vaccine is out, everybody is back to normal. Would things from a financial crime perspective would have changed, that there are now new emerging threats because of this pandemic that become part of the new normal in the future, that professionals in our community need to be prepared for, and how can they do that? Are there some clear trends that are emerging that a particular type of financial crime is going to become more prevalent, or is it too early to say that? Any trends you're seeing in your respective organizations, or even as you talk to other members of the community? Rick, maybe you can start there.
So haven't seen it yet. I mean, we've certainly seen, and some of us recently joined a call with the FBI in the United States where they were talking about some activity, but it appeared to be pretty specific to pandemic. So there was a huge and I forget what state it was in, but somebody was offering like 50 million N95 masks. And we know that those don't exist. If they did, they wouldn't be sitting in a warehouse somewhere. So, to me, that's the same old stuff. It's a different product. We've seen on the fraud side, and it seems to be moving through the U.S. a bit, where we have accounts being opened through identity theft, so enough information to open the account, and then we are getting payments of unemployment benefits from states where the state is not doing the authentication to match up who opened the account with who's making the claim. So it could be Marcus making the claim, but the transactions are going into my account. So, but again, to me, that's just a new fraud based on the circumstances of the day. And I think, the bad guys see that. They pivot a lot better than we do. So they see that unemployment benefit requests are way up. Maybe they can get in and get in through states that don't have as great controls and take advantage of that. But in terms of what we see for the future, so I haven't seen anything yet on, for example, on the terrorism side, to the extent that we would see it in the banks, that there's any big change. Haven't seen any new significant money laundering schemes that look a lot different, other than, again, some of us are starting to see what appears to be some money laundering related to inappropriately getting the funding from the government and then starting to move that money around. But again, to me, and this goes back to Marcus's point, is it's the same old scheme. It's just a new set of facts.
Marcus, anything from any early trends that you're seeing that may become part of the new normal?
Well, if the vaccine is out in a year's time, and hopefully it has been then widely applied, we can hopefully meet face to face and have the good old networking again that we have had at all of these events before, because as we know, the real interesting stuff often happens outside the sessions as much as in the sessions. But
exactly.
Besides that personal wish that we can get back together, on the business side, I think we will see some changes. That's for sure. And I think it goes back to what Rick said earlier and what I alluded to, is kind of probably see a change in the payment mix. I think that will be something that will stay. And Rick, you mentioned earlier about the roadside delivery not accepting cash. The question is, will they go back to cash, or have they then found out actually that's pretty cool, and now the consumer accepted it? If they would have tried to introduce that 3 months ago, the consumer would have said, no, way too difficult to deal with, I go to another one. Now everyone has to do it. Consumers get used to it. Will they go back? I mean, obviously I live in Italy and it's a very heavy cash society. Now everything is electronic. Everything. It doesn't matter. Delivery, takeaway, everything is electronic payment. That was unimaginable even 2 months ago. Now everyone is used to. People have even applied for credit cards. They never had a credit card before. Businesses went out and bought all sorts of mobile devices to take credit cards. So that's something we need to watch. How it will stay, I think we see the extreme probably now. The pendulum will be swinging somewhere in the middle. Where it will stop, we will find out. There's other concerns I have, however, Rohit, and these are things like CDD, customer due diligence. Now, obviously, that will not change. We still need to understand the customer. But there's also something I've seen now here and there in pockets that make me a little bit nervous that I want to pay a little bit more attention to. There's a big concern that criminal gangs will start using this situation to, given that they can't get rid of their cash as easy as before, as Rick said, will use the situation to give loans, personal loans. Loan sharking will be a big challenge to companies, because they need to get rid of the pile of cash they're sitting on. So the money is still there. The illegal money will be still there. The criminal activities will be still going on differently, though, but there will be money. So they're sitting on piles of cash, which they can't get rid of. So looking at what other funding has a company received. And of course, I'm not talking about the Fortune 500 here. I'm talking more the SME sector, your mom and pop stores around the corner that are really fighting for survival. Maybe even all the way kind of the smaller mid-corp segment, where you look maybe 500 employees, maybe they need to have an emergency loan and they maybe go to people they would normally not go to. So understanding more these kind of activities will be interesting to see. I think we need to be very vigilant as ever, but then also think maybe slightly differently than what we normally thought, because it is more difficult for criminals to get rid of their cash. And of course, now these days it's much more lucrative to deal with masks than with drugs. So let's see what that will do.
Right. So, in the interest of time, one last question. Obviously, we have thousands of people dialed in and logged in from around the world. What can they expect over the next 24 hours? There's obviously a lot of different sessions, but if there's a couple of sessions that you are looking forward to, or if you want to just talk about some broad themes, Rick, why don't you go first?
Yeah, so I'm always very interested in the what's new, what's happening in the world, and I see we have in a track we have several sessions around what the trends are today, sort of the update, which I think will follow on what Marcus and I have been talking about a little bit, and I think a much broader perspective in terms of what folks are seeing and what they might expect. The other track that I'm very interested in, there's a whole track on sanctions, and we sort of seem to, at least from my perspective, not think about it as much because we're in the moment. We're worried about the pandemic, and actually, again in the U.S., and I'm sure that this will be discussed, there was a relaxation of some of those sanctions to get humanitarian aid into countries where we normally wouldn't be able to send any money. So. And I'm one of the things I'm always focused on is in the moment we want to do that, but then on the review of that after the fact, did we do the right thing, and what's that review going to look like? If it's from our internal auditors, or if it's from our external auditors or our regulators, are we doing the right things?
Marcus, specific sessions that you're looking forward to?
Plenty of. I'm not sure if I have enough time, actually, certainly not in the day. But actually, Rohit, do we give an award for the persons actually that follow all the sessions online from the first to the last? Maybe we should give a special award.
That's a good idea. We've announced it right now.
Yeah, for the binge, so to speak, for the binge watching. But no, I think it was a great opportunity. The reason why I say look at all of these sessions, because it's unique, right? So think about this that way. Normally, you would go to maybe a local conference in your place. Maybe you go to a national conference. Of course, you always have some international topics. But as you maybe have seen also from some teasers, other senior people also encourage, go also to some sessions that you don't know anything about. Rick mentioned already some great sessions that I will also participate in as an attendee. But also, I think everyone should pick saying, yep, great. I need those for my work. And here's a few. Actually, I use those just for my personal education. I would like to encourage everybody to do that, because now this time it's all delivered to you on the doorstep. You can sit there in your pajamas all day long and you can watch and zoom into the sessions you normally would have never access to. So make the most of it. And that's what I'm most interested in, Rohit. It's kind of the first time ever we do this, getting this global mixture. It's kind of a potpourri of a global financial crime overview in 24 hours. And I'm very curious to see how that all works out.
Great. No, thank you both of you for setting this up excellently for the next 24 plus hours. And thank you also for your insights and all that you do for the community.